You've completed your 6th week of studies in New Testament Exposition 2. This lesson covered Hebrews and James, with the following details being particularly important. Few scholars today hold to the idea that Paul wrote Hebrews. First, the language of the book is quite different from Paul's in his letters. Second, and perhaps most damaging, is that the writer says that he heard the gospel from those who received it from Christ. See chapter 2, verse 3. Something Paul vehemently had denied about himself elsewhere. For example, Galatians 1, 11 through 16, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 8. While the author's precise identity remains elusive, it's possible to infer a few pieces of information regarding the writer from the letter itself. First, the author was male, the masculine participle used in 1132. Second, the author was obviously a gifted and eloquent speaker, displaying an impressive command of ancient rhetoric. Third, the author was well educated. Fourth, he was most likely Jewish, showing familial relations with his readers. Fifth, the writer was familiar with the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. And sixth, the author was a second-generation believer. See again Hebrews 2:3. AD 70 was found to be the latest possible date for the writing of Hebrews, because the letter was in all probability written before the Jewish War, including the destruction of the Jewish temple in the year 70, since the writer speaks of the sacerdotal system still in the present tense in Hebrews chapter 9, verses 6 through 10. The destination is likely a Jewish Christian congregation in Rome, whose purpose was to warn people in these Jewish Christian congregations against reverting back to non-apostolic or non-messianic Judaism in order to avoid being persecuted as Christ followers. From a textual standpoint, there was some reflection on the role of angels in chapters 1 and 2, where Jesus was shown to be superior to them, and the area that was most in focus here was the angel's role in mediating the law. Next, we turned our attention to James. James, son of Joseph, half-brother of Jesus, was found to be the likely author in the work. Given the absence of conventional indications of time, such as references to specific individuals, places, or events, the letter is rather difficult to date. If the above discussion of authorship was correct, then the book was written during the lifetime of James the Just, that is, sometime between 62 and 63. On the other end of the spectrum, the letter must have been written subsequent to James' conversion, 1 Corinthians 15:7, that is, no earlier than approximately 33. The letter must have been written after James became a prominent leader in the Jerusalem church. This can be dated to around 41 to 42, if you compare that with Acts chapter 12, verse 17. There's no discussion or even acknowledgement of the question of Gentile inclusion in the church, for example in Acts 11, 1 through 18, or the controversy spawned by the agitators in Acts 15:5 or Galatians 2, 11 through 13. Much less the resolution of these issues at the Jerusalem Council in the year 49, Acts 15, 1 through 21. Thus it seems that the letter was most likely written prior to the Jerusalem Council, and thus prior to Paul's letters, and perhaps even prior to the Gentile mission. So the most likely range during which the letter was written spans from 42 unto 49, written by James from Jerusalem to the diaspora Christ followers outside of Jerusalem. With regards to genre, it was found that Hebrews and James have an appearance of a homily or a sermon, even possibly a synagogue sermon. However, they are both essays addressing a widely dispersed group of believers, and in this way, they are similar to 1 John. With regard to specific textual matters, James 2, 14 to 26 is seen as controversial because it is often interpreted as a repudiation of Paul's doctrine of salvation by faith alone. For example, in Romans 3:28, Galatians 2, 15 and 16, Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. We uncovered 3 scholarly views on this issue. 1, that James disagreed with Paul and was seeking to correct him, or vice versa. 2, James corrected a misunderstanding of Paul. And 3, James and Paul addressed 2 related but distinct issues. James and Paul, however, do not disagree on faith and works. They actually agree on the issue. First, both see faith as necessary for salvation, James 2:18 and Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Second, faith without works is not saving faith, James 2:17, 20 and 24, and 1 Corinthians 15:2. And 3, saving faith is accompanied by works, James 2:24, Romans 3:31, and Ephesians 2:8 through 10. The relationship between faith and works is actually the primary contribution to the canon from the letter of James.